Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Eric Woolfe's play, The Strange and Eerie Memoirs of Billy Wuthergloom. So this is a spooky-ish Bildungsroman. The Bildungsroman is, as I've said before in other videos, a fancy English instructor way of saying a coming-of-age story. So this is a play about the transition from childhood to young adulthood, particularly through puberty, and it is the experiences of a narrator named Billy Wuthergloom, who is continually subjected to paranormal experiences. From a succubus that lives under his bed, who's a very attractive naked woman with fangs who continually threatens to suck his bones, with the obvious sexual connotations of that, to a period where his reflection runs off and becomes really, really cool. And even though Billy is a ninth grader, the reflection is dating a senior and is about to have sex with her when he, the reflection, is sort of called back to Billy and is sort of reattached in this sort of Peter Pan almost type thing, right? The opening bit of Peter Pan, where his shadow has escaped and is in Wendy's bedroom and stuff like this. Through to this ghostly woman who rises up out of this lake or river pond thing. I can't remember exactly what the details are. I guess I can pull it up here and see. I think it is it's a creek. Okay. So this ghostly woman rises up out of this creek. She's very beautiful, and she conveys to Billy's best friend, Herschel Fischmacher. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right, because there's a lot of SCHs, SCK bits in there. But she sort of tells her story of having been murdered by this guy to Herschel Fischmacher, and he falls in love with her and declares that he's going to marry her someday. Part of the reason that Herschel Fischmacher matters is because he's Billy's best friend, and part of the reason he's Billy's best friend is because he has this ability to deal with the paranormal and this sort of supernatural knowledge about how to do things like trap the succubus. So he creates a trap. He sort of lures her in with some sort of potion or concoction, and he knows the particular phrases coming from the Cthulhu cultic language to trap her in this container. So Herschel Fischmacher, who I'm going to keep referring to by both names because Billy, as Billy says, he is a two-name person, whereas most people are a one-name person. You would tend to refer to them by one name, either their first name or last name. For Herschel Fischmacher, he's a two-name person. So Billy knows that this paranormal stuff is going on around him. He doesn't really understand it, but Herschel Fischmacher is the only other person who can see it, can understand it, sort of knows that it's happening. And so they become best friends, partially out of that partisan reason, even though Herschel Fischmacher is the weird loner kid that nobody likes or hangs out with. So that's what we got going on. The play itself is a sort of interesting almost monologue play in that this is a combined live action and puppet show. That seems to be Eric Woolfe's big thing, right? He's big into combining human performers and puppets, which is an unusual approach in Western theater. It's not something we tend to do that much. In part because I feel like in the Western conception of puppetry, we tend to think of it as stuff like the Muppets, right? The sort of outsized impact of Jim Henson on our popular conception of puppetry, right? I mean, I actually, when I was in high school, I was part of a puppet team, a group through the local YMCA, where we did puppet-based skits to teach about safety and whatever it was. And those puppets were very sort of Muppet-like, Jim Henson-like. Whereas in other parts of the world, there's actually major puppetry traditions, particularly like Southeast Asia. Puppetry is a massive part of their theater culture in a way it simply isn't in the West. And I think that Woolfe's puppets are more in the sort of Jim Henson vein, with like being very colorful, like bright, foamy, whatever. Although there is one puppet at one point in this where Billy is kissing his first girlfriend, and that puppet, according to a footnote, was played by a toilet plunger in the original. So, I mean, I think there's a degree of creativity and uniqueness to this. But because, I mean, really sort of with the exception of ventriloquist dummies, puppets are generally not considered that scary by most people, I think. It's hard to really do terrifying horror with puppets. There's always this sort of element of joviality, of lightness to it. And so I think Woolfe has this very interesting blending of styles because his subject matter tends to be very dark and very gory in the case of the anthology plays in Sideshow of the Damned. Less gory and more sort of supernatural, with a sort of side of creepy attention being paid to the physicality of puberty elements. In this play, Strange and Eerie Memoirs of Billy Wuthergloom. But within this context, we have, again, this sort of strange blending that works really, really well. So I want to take you through some of the things that I think, some of the things that build or undercut the horrificness of this play. So to start out, the opening scene description really sets us up for sort of horrific thing, right? Lights up on a twisted expressionist world of childhood and terror, like a public school version of the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. A gaunt, cadaverous musician horrifically lurks onto the playing area. He pulls back a curtain or opens a large trunk to reveal Billy, who, apart from an unsettling, eerie pallor, is a young, nondescript man like any you would meet on the street. So again, in this sort of visual reference to Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, this is clearly identifying with the horror trope, the gaunt, cadaverous musician, very much a sort of creepy figure, who incidentally is just sort of background throughout the rest of this. The musician does not really come up much after this. But then we get this sort of opening song, and there's songs throughout that Billy sings. And the song introduces this sort of litany of childhood fears, and so that immediately sets that context for us. So I'm not going to sing it, I'm going to just read it. There's a monster in your closet, there's a goblin down the hall, the sobbing noise you hear each night is the children in the walls. And there's a footnote here that says that's a recurring nightmare of my mother's. I think it's pretty creepy too. There's a witch who comes to get you if you're not in bed by 10. She has a smelly burlap sack and she'll try to stuff you in. And there's a footnote for this stanza as well. A recurring nightmare of mine. Creepier, most of these things are actually my real childhood bogeys, especially the toilet monster. He scared me bad. There's a thing inside your toilet and it doesn't have a name. It reaches up and grabs your bum and pulls you down the drain. There's a scratching at your window, better keep the curtain closed. It's the man with ice for eyeballs and a meat hook for a nose. And the pale woman is under the street light, and I know that she can smell you. No matter what your mommy tells you, the pale woman gets closer each night. Then there's a spoken bit. I've come to warn you that there are shadowy things that we cannot see, grim, unearthly creatures that prey upon us when we are weak and unsure and our bodies are changing. When you are a child, people always tell you that puberty is natural. Don't be afraid. They lie. Puberty is supernatural, so be afraid, be terrified, and pray the things don't find you until long after your pubic hair is grown. And then there's more song, again, going through these sort of childhood fears, basic types of monsters, stereotypical fears, etc., etc. So, we've got all of this stuff going on, and again, the fears, the anxieties, the supernatural terrors are pretty much all linked to puberty in some way, either in terms of developing sexual awareness and desire, bodily changes, things like that. All of these sorts of things. And of course, there is this sort of element, right, of terrifyingness to puberty, because even if you sort of consciously are aware of what's going on and the norms of bodily development, psychological development through puberty, etc., etc., it is still nonetheless a profound and fundamental change that your body is going through and that you have no real control over. So all of that happens. And this occurs both on the sort of physiological level with physical changes, and particularly with Billy's various girlfriends and his struggles to perform sexually, etc., etc. But also with Herschel Fischmacher, psychological changes are really, really dramatized because he is regularly sort of sent to mental institutions. He's medicated, probably on antipsychotics. And ultimately, he ends up taking his own life so that he can be with this ghost woman that he had fallen in love with when he and Billy were children. And of course, teenage suicide rates are disproportionately high, particularly people who have been bullied the way that Herschel Fischmacher has, etc., etc. And so, yeah, I mean, it's again, this very sort of gloomy is a good way of putting it. Like, the supernatural elements are not terrifying, right? This isn't, I don't know, this isn't The Exorcist or something like this, where it's genuinely frightening. It is unsettling. So I think eerie is maybe a good word for it, because we've all those of us who are adults at least, have all experienced puberty and sort of gone through these changes, there is something recognizable in the sources of terror for this.